So, Thomas, thank you for joining us and for being one of our judges for the Franchise Development Website Awards. First, just to kick things off, wanted to get your thoughts overall as you were going through the websites and seeing what was out there in terms of what brands have on their FD sites. Was there anything that stood out to you overall as something that was a great trend or something that you saw that was consistent that maybe hasn't been there before? Just kind of your overall thoughts on the whole process.
Oh, there's a huge difference in the quality of sites. So it's,
Hmm.
I think one of the things that stuck out to me the most was just how out of sync we are as an industry with the way people research and buy franchises today. If you looked at any other industry outside of franchising, you'd see much more sophisticated website architecture, design, content strategy, and there were some really excellent sites
Hmm.
that executed well on this. And a lot that didn't, like they were missing some basic stuff. And there was a lot of copycat sites going on where
What do
it
you
was,
think is kind of that line of what differentiates the good from the great, even of what were the concepts or things that you saw that stood out as being, really up to date and advantageous for the brands?
yeah, so there's a few. And, I think in our industry, if you're going to sell a $500,000 franchise or $1 million franchise or even $100,000 franchise, that's a big ticket item.
Yeah.
And so it's shocking on some of these sites that you think you can recruit somebody and engage them and help them do the educational research they need with 4 pages or 5 pages or even a single page. On some of these sites are just single page sites. You go to the consumer site for that brand, and there's a substantial amount of marketing effort that goes into understanding the customer journey. But I think I really gravitated towards sites that had mixed media and more broader, so that if I was going to really wrap my mind, I'm a franchisee myself and own multiple units. I really want to understand, where customers come from, what's the culture of the brand, how do I get what are the startup costs? What are the earnings claims? Like, who are the leadership team people?
Yeah.
And I really want to learn that in a lot more detail. So I gravitated towards sites that were much broader, where you could spend 30 or 45 minutes doing research, and that there weren't that many of those. A lot of
Wow.
the whole time you'd spend on the site was less than 5 minutes, and I think that's dangerous because you're just going to lose people. With 4,400 franchise concepts in America and another 1,250 in Canada, there's no way you're going to grab attention and keep it with that many choices unless you could really be relevant to people. So
Yeah.
content structure was my number one piece, to seeing logical, linear content structure that was easy for people to understand.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Especially in today's day and age, like you were saying, people are going to go do their own research. And as they're searching, these pieces of content need to be able to populate. If you only have a one-page site, sure, it might be optimized for mobile, but people are going to need a lot more meat to learn more about the opportunity. Because again, as you said, this isn't, a meal that's out to eat that you're spending, $20 on. This is your life savings that you're investing. It's an emotional and heavy financial burden for sure.
For sure. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
the scope of content was not just the scope of content itself, but
Hmm.
the style of content. So written words are certainly important, and a lot of really skimpy language on a lot of sites. Real catchy marketing slogan. On a slice of the pizza industry, a really cheesy kind of slogan backed up with one paragraph of information isn't enough to really understand the value proposition for a brand. So I really like longer format text, seems to work better. But it's not just text, it's
Hmm.
with better video, and not the video where you have franchisees with a logo shirt and they're walked out of the conference and stood against a wall, also has logos on it. And it sounds like somebody's forcing them to say something nice.
Right.
It's like, hey, like somebody's holding a gun to their head. Yeah, it's really aggressive. And from a research perspective, I really like the videos that were more storytelling and interesting and documentary style and cinematic. There's a lot of that on a lot of these sites where people are starting to invest a lot more, often as much as the website cost in video development. And I really like visual content,
Hmm.
pictures, galleries of pictures. I really like good infographics that are native to the brand. They're clearly not clip art oriented, and good native pictures without clip art. You can tell, like, when you get to a site and it's got cheesy clip art or fake stock pictures. I mean, it just doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't work very well. And then lastly, I like the podcast content. Like, there's so few sites with audio content, and like we're doing right now,
Hmm.
there's an audio component to this. We build a lot of it on the sites we develop, and I just think that's the more of that's going to, you're going to see more of that in the future. A lot more audio consumable content.
Absolutely. It's yeah, the candidate wants to be able to see themselves in the shoes of, another franchisee that's doing it well and be able to paint a clear picture of how they're going to be able to pull this off and see a return on their investment. And I think that that's where that, type of video and audio and imagery plays in, because if, it's a generic stock image, you're not going to be able to make the connection of, I'm going to really be able to do this and be like this franchisee that's featured that has a full story. And again, as you said, isn't just like, a quick 2-second video after a conference that might not be the best quality. It's definitely worth the investment. I agree, for brands to make sure that their sites have these components on there to make sure that their candidate has the most information at their disposal, especially as the trend shifts more and more to people wanting to learn more about the franchise opportunity by themselves before reaching out to the brand and engaging in that full-on lead process.
Yeah, for sure. It really, the other piece I saw that was for me kind of disturbing as both a buyer of franchises and somebody that does lead generation is the lack of forms, the heavy-handed forms, the lack of trackable phone numbers, the lack of text opt-in, just the simple architecture of when you build a recruitment website, it's got one goal in life. It's to take a unique visitor, educate them, and convert them into somebody you can talk to, that a salesperson can have a conversation with. And beautiful sites, nice structured content, lousy forms, no forms at all. Forms you have to click through 3 pages to get to. Probably have horrible conversion rates. This is a recruitment site is a lead generation site. That's the whole point of having. You can't do that. Why are you wasting your money? And it's or my other pet peeve is just seeing forms that are super long. Form friction of just shorter forms work substantially better than longer forms. And lots of unnecessary fields on forms. All you really need is name, phone number, and email. You don't need anything else on a form.
Yeah.
But like, how did you hear about us? How much money do you have? Check here if you really have the money that you say you have. Check here if you really want to buy a franchise. Check here if you want to be texted. It was huge forms that nobody, and we try to fill one of those out on a cell phone and see how hard it is.
Yeah.
There were some sites that used what we would call like trackable phone numbers with click to call kind of structure, where if you're on a mobile phone, you can just touch the number and talk to a recruiter. Text opt-ins, I really like that a lot. There's so few sites doing that, where there's a text us a question button. Instead of a chat function, you can reach out and text a written question to a recruiter without having to give any information. And so that's a really popular way. And then shorter form, I really like forms that are visible on every page, that don't require a click, and have the absolute minimum number of fields. I mean, people, just the days of using long forms are just gone. That's an outdated, old school methodology. I just don't think it works today.
Yeah, it's the nature of the beast. I mean, patience, even for buying a business, is really thin amongst people that are filling out these forms. If it doesn't load right away or it's not easy to find, people are going to give up. There isn't that added benefit of people trying to search for that now. It needs to be accessible and quick and responsive. And to your point too about, the form and the depth of the form, I agree. People don't necessarily at first, inquiry want to say, I have X amount of dollars in my bank account and I promise I'm not lying to you. I think with some of the trends are shifting towards even being a little bit more incognito at first, and potentially having a form that's, I'm not quite ready to get 5 calls a week, but I do want to learn a little bit more. How can I get some more info? And still helps brands get people into their funnels and get people more information, but also helps save their time and avoid people getting upset if they're, getting hounded when they might not actually be ready to commit.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what do you think, as you were looking at these sites and you talked about some of these positives, what do you think is something that brands might be missing, or what was, kind of that factor that stood out as being something that you might recommend brands move away from or be outdated, that kind of separated even, not just the good from the great, but, the good from the not so good at all?
You mentioned mobile first, or it's true.
Mm-hmm.
People using the internet on mobile devices, and that's a big thing. I think that's got to be really careful with that, because the truth is the average buyer is looking at businesses for several years, sometimes a decade. When they zero in on a brand, we see in our own research that there's 6 or 9 months of research, sometimes an hour on the website over multiple visits before opt-in for a really serious buyer. And that journey starts on a mobile phone but ends up on a laptop or desktop when they get really serious about their research. So thinking about enough content to populate that or fulfill the appetite for that kind of research, like people just don't have it. And my pet peeve I saw that I think really works against this is Instead of having a linear kind of research funnel where it's next, previous, people have broken up their content into subsections. So have like about us at the top is something you see on a lot of sites, and they'll have 3 pages underneath it. Then next to that is growth markets, and next to that is our process. I don't think people really care about your process, honestly. I don't think you need to have that on your website. That's a salesperson saying, I have a sales process and I want you to follow my process. But breaking up the navigation on the top nav into those subcategories is predicated on this idea that everybody goes to the homepage, and that's how you get people to your site. And the truth is, half of the people that go to your site go in through an internal page. If you don't have a very clear path for them to follow that unpacks the story correctly, you end up with a much shorter time on site, or they get just 10% of your story. They don't get the full power. It's just like if a salesperson had a 45-minute sales pitch at a discovery call that you had orchestrated, and they just randomly chose 10 minutes of that 45 minutes, it would be really ineffective. And that's what people are doing with their websites, is this idea that people are in a hurry and won't read much. If you're serious about buying a business and you get interested in it, that people will really go deep. I mean, we just see that. There hasn't been any drop off in the amount of time people will spend on a recruitment website, even though we're busy and we're using mobile phones. They just start the journey on a mobile phone and end up on a bigger device when they get more serious.
Yeah, it's not an industry that's going to lack its due diligence for sure, because it is such a large investment. And even on that note, how do you think that these FD sites are going to continue evolving in the years ahead as the industry continues to shift?
Well, I think if you have consumer marketing people on your team that do your consumer marketing, that often works against you getting good results in franchising. We see that a lot. What works on a consumer site where you're trying to sell a 99-cent taco or get an insurance quote or book a carpet cleaning appointment, those tactics and strategies are totally different than recruitment marketing, which is a super high ticket item with a very, very long research funnel. And so I think you're still going to need to have a home base with a really structured brand story where it doesn't matter what technology we're using. If I want to buy a business, whether we have internet or not, I still have the same 40 or 50 questions that I want detailed answers to. How do I finance it? Who are these people driving it? Why is this industry big? What's the value proposition? Who are the franchisees? And what do they have to say? So you have to have a vehicle to handle all that. I think what is changing is that some of that, the way we do breadcrumbs in content marketing is changing. And the change in intent-based marketing via Google AdWords and things that are historically where people were intentionally looking to buy something, versus how do you build brand and awareness on platforms, because not everybody's on Google anymore. There was a period 5 years ago where it was a Google universe. That's 25% of the visibility today. It's all these other things, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, email, Messenger, platforms are endless. How do you connect your brand story to all those platforms and have a website that can draw traffic from those and educate people and still convert them in a format that they want? I think that's the challenge. So I think you'll see more audio. I think you'll see still see long format separate recruiting websites. I think those are always going to perform well. Mm-hmm. But the structured content might have different pieces. You might have bigger video pieces. You might have more podcasts. You might have a lot more visual content that mirrors, like if you're coming from Instagram and I'm selling a smoothie franchise, I might have boomerang style videos on an Instagram ad that connects to a website or a lead form, and then a landing page on the website, which feeds you into the funnel, has that kind of aesthetic to it, versus somebody who goes from the consumer site to the franchise site might see a much more of a business kind of style explanation of the business. You got to think about where people are coming from and what they're doing. So I think that's a challenge. We're not prepared for that in our industry. We just barely got the idea that you can have a website, much less the website you have to have is now outdated.
Yeah, I think historically the industry has been a little bit slower to adapt to some of these technologies that have come out and how they're leveraging them. So yeah, I agree. The sooner that brands start thinking about that and how they can adapt to things like a video or a podcast and make it that quality that people are now expecting across the board, the better it's going to be for them in the long run, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's necessary though. I mean, the beautiful thing is people are buying businesses for emotional reasons, and they're gravitating towards businesses. We have all these younger buyers in the market. The market for franchising has never been better than it is now, and the population of people looking at franchising is bigger than it's ever been. At the same time, there are more franchise systems than there, and there are more every day opening up. And so, I think if you have a business, you have to really be clear on who you're targeting and understand the emotionally relative story that person has. How is that person or that group of people are going to connect with the value proposition for this brand. And if you can do that and build a website that sucks people in and is interesting, it's the power of a well-told story. Is it you don't feel like you're being sold to? It's interesting to read and listen to. So I think that's the challenge today. Is how do you cover all those gaps? I mean, it's much more sophisticated to build something that looks simple but is really deep and structured today. And we didn't see a lot of that. There's some really
Yeah.
good ones, some really, really awful ones in that mix. And I wonder how people grow with some of those sites. But like not everybody has the same goals.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how the sites kind of continue to evolve as we keep doing this year over year. But thank you for the insights. I think this is, example of the content that we're hoping, kind of continues to be created within the industry, and appreciate you being the judge. And thanks
Yeah,
again for calling in for this interview.
yeah. Thank you so much.